Hello YouTube. I'm just going to make a quick unscripted video responding to an article I've seen passed around on Twitter from The Guardian under the opinion section, and it's titled, "Alt-Right Online Poison Nearly Turned Me into a Racist," by Anonymous. So someone that doesn't want to be known. And you'll understand why as we go into the article. The subheading is, "It started with Sam Harris, moved on to Milo Yiannopoulos, and almost led to full-scale Islamophobia. If it can happen to a lifelong liberal, it can happen to anyone." Okay, so the reason that this article interests me is that I've watched Milo Yiannopoulos videos, and I've agreed with some things he said. I've disagreed with other things he said, and I don't think that he's I don't think of him as a serious thinker. I think of him as an entertainer. But it scares me that a lot of people don't view him just as an entertainer. But anyways, that's a separate issue. And I'm not overly familiar with Sam Harris's work. So let's get into the article. "I am a happily married young white man. I grew up in a happy conservative household. I've spent my entire life, save the last 4 months, as a progressive liberal. All of my friends are very liberal or left-leaning centrists." I'm going to pause there. So you don't have any right-wing friends at all. So that doesn't really surprise me. That you're a lifelong quote unquote liberal and you don't know any right-wing people, but it should concern you that all your friends have pretty much the same political views as you. It means you're not being exposed to any alternative viewpoints. I mean, I've personally gone out of my way to have friends who have different political viewpoints, and I've tried to maintain relationships, at least verbal dialogues, with people of a variety of viewpoints. My guess is that you've actually met right-wing people in your life. Maybe you even have right-wing family members, but you've chosen not to remain friends with them or in touch with them because, like most people, you don't like views that you disagree with. But that's just an assumption on my part. I don't know for sure. Let's continue. "I have always voted Liberal Democrat or Green. I voted Remain in the referendum. The thought of racism in any form has always been abhorrent to me. When Leave won, I was devastated." Okay, so we've got the idea. This person was a basically stereotypical left-wing person. That's fine. Let's continue. "I was curious as to the motives of Leave voters. Surely they were not all racist, bigoted, or hateful. I watched some debates on YouTube. Obvious points of concern about terrorism were brought up. A Leaver cited Sam Harris as a source. I looked him up. This, quote, intellectual free thinker was very critical of Islam. Naturally, my liberal knee-jerk reaction was to be shocked, but I listened to his concerns and some of his debates." So this tells us a lot here. First of all, why is intellectual freethinker in quotes? I don't know. I guess those are just labels that people put on someone they like that don't really mean anything. That's fine. But it tells us a lot that you were shocked that someone was critical of Islam. I mean, would it shock you if someone was very critical of Christianity, for example? Probably not, right? Maybe you yourself are critical of Christianity, but someone being critical of Islam is just unacceptable or strange or shocking. That should tell you a lot about the kind of person that we're dealing with here in this article. I mean, to me, I guess it would be shocking to see someone critical of Islam in public in certain parts of the world, certain cities, because that's kind of like a social suicide to do that, right? Just unacceptable. But for the very idea of someone being critical of Islam to shock you, that probably means you're in a bit of a echo chamber, which again comes back to our original point of him only having liberal or left-leaning friends. This, I think, is where YouTube's suggested videos can lead you down a rabbit hole. I'm going to stop there. You have choice about what videos you click, So you're acting as if you had no control. Sorry, I'm addressing the author as if I'm actually talking to him. I'm going to continue to do that, but I don't actually expect the author to ever actually hear this. So you have a choice about which one you click. You only click on something if it appeals to you somehow, right? If the thumbnail or the title speaks to you in some way, where I want to know more about that. But the way that this is being written is as if you had no control over your actions. It's YouTube suggested videos' fault. It's not that you were actually interested in these ideas. It's that it's YouTube's fault. Anyways. Moving on from Harris, I unlocked the Pandora's box of "it's not racist to criticize Islam" content. So, content that was accurate? Is that the Pandora's box you're talking about? Pandora's box of accuracy. I mean, because Islam isn't a race. So, I mean, criticism of Islam could take the form of racism. I mean, if you criticize Islam by expressing hatred of Arabs, then yeah, that could be racist. But that's not really criticism of Islam anymore, is it? It's racism against Arabs. It's more accurately described as that than criticism of Islam. Criticism of a religion is not racist, unless you think that all the people who are Muslims are of one race, which they're not. There's lots of races. People of every race practice Islam. So I don't understand. I do understand this viewpoint. I'm not going to pretend I don't understand. I know why people think that criticizing Islam is racist. It's because people think that the only reason someone would criticize Islam is because they're secretly racist against Arabs or brown people or people from the Middle East. It's this whole idea that people think they know other people's motives, even if that person denies it and is very clear about their motives. Anyways, let's go on. Eventually, I was introduced by YouTube algorithms to Milo Yiannopoulos and various anti-SJW videos. SJW, or Social Justice Warrior, is a pejorative directed at progressives. Well, Social Justice Warrior is a pejorative directed at people who call themselves progressives, generally. But that's a very clean definition of that, I would say. It's a very whitewashed definition of Social Justice Warrior. Most of us watching this probably know what a Social Justice Warrior really is. And to me, what a Social Justice Warrior is, I haven't thought long and hard about this definition, I'm just going to throw it out here, is someone who espouses extreme left-wing viewpoints, but from a very authoritarian perspective. So someone who is not tolerant of opposing viewpoints, someone who promotes authoritarian views, so imposing their view on other people, and who assumes that anyone who disagrees with them is a terrible person. Those are generally the aspects of what I would call a social justice warrior. So it's not something that's directed at just every progressive, or everyone who calls himself progressive, which, again, is progressive itself is a ridiculous term, because it implies that anyone who doesn't share those views does not want society to progress. And everyone wants society to progress. We just all disagree on how it should progress and what defines progress. Moving on. They were shocking at first, but always presented as innocuous criticism from people claiming to be liberals themselves or centrists, sometimes just a regular conservative, but never ever identifying as the dreaded alt-right. Well, maybe you weren't watching alt-right videos. I mean, there are lots of people out there that identify as alt-right that will tell you, yes, I'm alt-right. I have people that I follow on Twitter that are alt-right. I see people retweeted regularly on Twitter that are genuinely alt-right, and a lot of them are crazy. But I follow them because I want to understand them. I want to understand this viewpoint. So if someone's not identifying as alt-right, they might not be alt-right. You might want to consider that. Anyways, moving on. For 3 months, I watched this stuff grow steadily more fearful of Islam. Not Muslims, they would usually say. Individual Muslims are fine. But Islam was presented as a threat to Western civilization. Fear-mongering content was presented in a compelling way by charismatic people who would distance themselves from the very movement of which they were a part. So there's some things to unpack here. This paragraph is implying that it's impossible to criticize Islam without actually being critical of individual Muslims, of Muslims. And it's also saying that Islam is not a threat to Western civilization, when it very clearly is, or at least certain aspects of it are. It's hard to argue that fundamental Islam is compatible with Western values. And I'll make the same claim. Individual Muslims are generally, on average, decent people, just like most people. But I will say that the vast majority of Muslims, in my experience, and the stats bear this out, have at least one, if not more, than a few views that are simply incompatible with Western values, modern Western values. So, you might know a Muslim person who is great in every way. They're kind, they're modern, they seem completely Westernized. But if they're an active Muslim, then I bet you can ask them about gay people, for example, and if they give you their honest opinion, you'll probably be shocked. Because they'll probably say, well, I don't think gay people should be allowed to get married, or I think being gay is immoral. Or if you say, like, oh, would you have a problem if we put gay people in jail or killed them? They might say yes. Or if you talk to them about terrorism and they gave you their honest opinion, they might say, oh yeah, sometimes it's justified, or honor killings, or whatever, or these various Sharia law-based or radical Islam-based ideas that are still held by a lot of moderate Muslims. I'm not making any overarching point about, whether Muslims are bad or Islam is bad or anything like that. I'm saying Islam generally isn't a great thing. But yeah, it's perfectly possible to be critical of Islam and not to hate Muslims. And I think it's a valid thing to say that Islam is a threat to Western civilization. There are definitely people within Islam who have a genuine desire to destroy Western civilization. And they have that in common with radical feminism. They just want to destroy it in different ways with different goals. But yeah, that's a separate issue. Continuing on. At the same time, the anti-SJW stuff also moved on to anti-feminism, men's rights activists, all that stuff. I followed a lot of these people on Twitter, but never shared any of it. So, let me get this right. You were okay with all that, I guess, because you were following the people. You saw the anti-feminism, you saw men's rights activism, you saw this criticism of Islam, and you were fine with all of it at the time. And again, following someone on Twitter is an active action. It's not something that happens to you, it's something you do. So you chose to follow these people, you were interested in these ideas, you were bringing it in. I just passively consumed it, because deep down, I knew I was ashamed of what I was doing. Okay, this is the important part of this for me. This is the part that I wanted, the reason that I'm making this video, the reason that this article interested me. Why is he ashamed? Or why was he ashamed? What he doesn't realize, first of all, this might not even be real. This might be just a fake article. I don't know, but I'm taking it as real. So the reason that he's ashamed, I think, and he's not even aware of this, is that he's fighting an indoctrination. He's describing what's happening to him as an indoctrination, but he's actually fighting a different one. And that indoctrination is his whole progressive ideology. Now, I'm not saying progressivism is a cult or anything like that, but if you have a strongly held ideology, it does have some religious features to it. It does have some cult-like or tribalistic features. So the way he described himself, he's been in a progressive mindset his entire life. He's been raised that way. All his friends are that way. So this is a lot of conditioning on him. And what he's describing is that conditioning flaring up. It's coming back into his head. So he's learning all these new things. He's enjoying them. He likes them. He's following people on Twitter. He's watching videos. He likes these ideas. He agrees with these ideas. But then his conditioning starts to tell him, no, bad, this is wrong. So it's not his logical thinking that's telling him this. He hasn't found some flaw in the reasoning. He hasn't seen bad actions by people. Nothing's happened at this point to make him reject these new ideas. Nothing anyone has said or done in the anti-SJW crowd has given him pause, has made him think, oh, okay, this is wrong. The only thing that's affecting him here is his past left-wing progressive conditioning. That's telling him, okay, no, I shouldn't be enjoying these ideas. This is bad. These ideas are bad. It has nothing to do with them being right or wrong. They're bad. Okay, we're going to continue on because this goes deeper. I'd started to roll my eyes when my friends talked about liberal, progressive things. What was wrong with them? Did they not understand what being a real liberal was? All my friends were just SJWs. They didn't know that free speech was under threat, and that politically correct culture and censorship were the true problem. Yeah, so this is the whole idea of that whole matrix analogy people use on both sides of this. I hear people talking about being red-pilled and all that, or about being woke. So they're both using the same basic analogy, and that's, once you start to think about these things, this issue of free speech, censorship, politically correct culture, all that, you are understanding something that most people don't understand. So to you, they seem ignorant and completely different. But if you expressed all this to them, you would seem ignorant and completely different. Because what mainstream progressive thought is completely incompatible with the anti-SJW stuff. You can't believe both at the same time, right? They're two very different realities that people are living. So people who understand all this stuff about the anti-SJW stuff, the stuff Milo Yiannopoulos talks about, people who understand that can't, they can pretend, but they can't genuinely participate in Western liberal culture, because you start to see everywhere examples of what people like Sargon of Akkad or Milo Yiannopoulos, what they talk about. And if your friends are all left-wing progressive, then some of them are probably going to be social justice warriors. And, once you see it, it's hard to not see anymore. This happens on both sides, as I said. There's the red pill and there's the getting quote-unquote woke. It's what Anita Sarkeesian talked about in her famous "Everything is Sexist" speech. It's once she started to learn about feminist theory and all that, then suddenly she saw it everywhere. Suddenly she could see all the examples of microaggressions or whatever, or implicit biases or explicit biases, and that she just called racism and sexism. So suddenly everything is racist, everything is sexist, etc. it can be very jarring especially when you first learn about this kind of thing, and then you start to see it everywhere. What the author didn't do is give it time and get used to it, and obviously didn't have a very deep understanding of all this. Anyways, continuing on. On one occasion, I'm ashamed to admit, very diplomatically expressed negative sentiments on Islam to my wife. Nothing overtly racist, just some of the innocuous type things the YouTubers had presented. Islam isn't compatible with Western civilization. So, there was a lot of couching of that. He's obviously very ashamed to have said this. This arguably something that's a fact. He's very ashamed of it. He very diplomatically expressed it. And he's ashamed that he did so. He's ashamed that he said something bad about Islam. So again, this is the left-wing progressive conditioning making him ashamed of having these ideas. It has nothing to do with him thinking they're wrong. It has everything to do with his conditioning kicking in. So her response? She was taken aback. Isn't that a bit right-wing? I justified it. Well, I'm more a left-leaning centrist. PC culture has gone too far. We should be able to discuss these things without shutting down the conversation by calling people racist or bigots. The indoctrination was complete. Oh, this is great. So there's a few things here. She said, "Isn't that a bit right-wing?" And he felt he needed to justify it because to him, his left-wing progressive conditioning has taught him that being right-wing is a bad thing. It's like a morally bad thing. Like he's obviously from the type of person for whom being called right-wing is an insult. It's not just a different set of political beliefs that could be right. That's bad. That is morally bad to be right-wing. To have any right-wing beliefs whatsoever that makes you a bad person. So that's where he's coming from here. That's his conditioning. And then he says, when he tries to justify having a bad thought about Islam, he considers that indoctrination. He's indoctrinated. He wasn't indoctrinated before. No. Now he's indoctrinated. What he's really describing here is a different indoctrination. I'm not saying that he hasn't been indoctrinated at this point into anti-SJW thought. He has. It happened quickly. He obviously, exposed himself to a lot of it in a very short time. So yeah, he was indoctrinated, but he had been indoctrinated for the rest of his life into the left-wing progressive thinking. So it's not as if this indoctrination is only going one way. He's fighting his previous indoctrination with his new indoctrination. At no point has he been a free thinker in this. At no point has he sat back and said, well, let's see, everything might be wrong. Let's look at what everyone's saying and see what's correct. He went straight from believing wholeheartedly in one thing without questioning it to believing an entire other thing without questioning it. So what I'm saying is this is not exactly a good example of someone that people should aspire to be like. About a week before the US election, I heard one of these YouTubers use the phrase red-pilled, a term from the film The Matrix, in reference to people being awakened to the truth about the world and SJWs. Suddenly I thought, this is exactly like a cult. What am I doing? I'm turning into an arsehole. I unsubscribed and unfollowed from everything, and told myself outright, you're becoming a racist. What you're doing is turning you into a terrible, hateful person. Until that moment, I hadn't even realized that alt-right was what I was becoming. I just thought I was a more open-minded person for tolerating these views. Yes, you were becoming a little bit more open-minded, although you're still not. You were never really an open-minded person. But yeah, generally, these anti-SJW viewpoints do promote being open-minded. At least people say to be open-minded. I know there are a lot of anti-SJW types who are not open-minded themselves, but that's a separate issue. But yeah, this is what it took for him to quit all this stuff. For all I know, he was a subscriber of mine. I don't know. But someone's mentioned the red pill, someone being red pilled, and he's like, whoa, okay, this is cult-like, I'm turning into an asshole, I'm becoming a racist, this is awful. So what really happened is the original conditioning won. This was a battle in his head, and the original conditioning won. Notice that at no point was anyone wrong in the anti-SJW community. It wasn't that, like, he watched Amazing Atheist video and saw him being an idiot. Nope. It was just somebody used a word that made him think it was kind of culty, and that was enough. He didn't reject any of the ideas. He didn't decide that anyone was wrong. They were bad. He was becoming a bad person. It was a moral choice. So his viewpoint about the world is determined by which view is morally correct, not factually correct, morally correct. And this is the key thing for understanding left-wing people. This is why the left-wing progressive ideology is so strong and is so difficult to break. It's because that view is presented as morally correct. It's also presented as factually correct, but more importantly, it's presented as morally correct. And you'll see this a lot. You hear the phrase "the right side of history." I'm on the right side of history. Trump is on the wrong side of history. That's a moral idea. They're not saying, I'm going to turn out to have been right about this in terms of factually right. They're going to talk about, I'm going to turn out to have been on the morally right side of this. Later, we're going to discover that you were a bad person, or that you supported a morally bad idea, and I supported the morally good idea. Environmentalism is all about everything about environmentalism, about environmental activism, is morality. It's rarely will you hear people lead with a factual argument in environmentalism. It's all feelings. It's all, this is the right thing to do. And that's true of pretty much every traditional left-wing viewpoint. So it's always morals. And the right does this a lot, especially the religious right. The religious right does this quite a bit as well. Both extremes do this. It's why the horseshoe theory works so well. The horseshoe theory being that if you go extreme left and you go extreme right, eventually they become pretty much indistinguishable. And that's because they both become more and more morally certain that they are correct. So whoever wrote this article is a very good example of what it's like to be totally indoctrinated into the left-wing progressive thinking, and to have experienced for a brief time the other side of it. Or not the other side, it's not like there's two sides, but a different side of that, a side incompatible with his original programming. But eventually he snapped back, and it was because he started to feel like he was becoming morally bad. And he didn't want to be a bad person. He wanted to be a good person. It would take every swear word under the sun to describe how I now feel about tolerating such content and gradually accepting it as truth. I've spent every day since feeling shameful for being so blind and so easily coerced. Yep. His original programming has completely reasserted itself. He is angry with himself for being tolerant. Think about that. There are certain viewpoints. If you're a left-wing progressive person, there are certain viewpoints that should not be tolerated. And they'll give you different justifications for that, but really, most left-wing people will argue for intolerance about certain things. And that's where all the exceptions to free speech come in. The hate speech laws and all that. Anyways, continuing on. US election day rolled around, and I was filled with dread. Trump's win felt like EU referendum morning all over again, magnified by 100. Although I never shared any of this rubbish with anybody, I feel partly responsible. It's clear this terrible ideology has now gone mainstream. This terrible ideology that is factually correct as far as you're concerned. Because, again, you still haven't argued with any of its points. You just said it's bad. It's terrible. So, does it occur? I know that people on the left think they're morally right and all that. But does it even occur to someone like this that people on the opposite side might think they're factually right at least? And that they might actually be factually. No, of course they don't actually think someone else might be factually right, because that would involve admitting to yourself that you might be wrong, and that takes a lot of mental courage to do. And most people don't have it. I don't always have it, but it's something I aspire to at least. It hit me like a ton of bricks. Online radicalization of young white men. It's here, it's serious, and I was lucky to be able to snap out of it when I did. And if it can get somebody like me to swallow it, a lifelong liberal, I can imagine the damage it is doing overall. And what's missing from this article, and it should be an important part of the article, is why did these ideas appeal to you to begin with? Because there was an appeal. You pretended there wasn't. You pretended it was YouTube's fault, or just something you fell into. You tripped and fell into anti-SJW thinking. But there was an appeal here. There was a reason that this appealed to you, that you liked these videos, that you followed these people, that you liked these ideas, that you thought they were right. There was a reason. But you're not addressing it here. You're just saying it can happen, but you didn't say why it happens. And if this is real, I have to imagine the reason that you're not saying why it happened is because it would mean admitting things about yourself that you don't want to admit. And or it might mean that you're afraid that other people will be like, oh yeah, you're right. These ideas do have some merit. Maybe I should look at them too. But we can't have that, because that would be morally wrong. We can't have anyone not being a liberal. That's awful. Or quote-unquote liberal. It seems so subtle. At no point did I think my casual and growing Islamophobia was genuine racism. Yeah, because it wasn't. Probably. I mean, to be fearful or hateful of Islam is not racist. I know, it's a tough thing to grasp if you've been indoctrinated to think that hating Islam is the same as hating brown people. But it's not. It's possible to dislike the religion without disliking the people who practice the religion. I mean, if you're anti-Christian, do you hate all white people? Or do you hate all Americans, or whoever in your mind practices Christianity the most? I mean, we'll just ignore the Egyptians who do it, or people of every race under the sun. Anyways, the good news for me is that my journey towards the alt-right was mercifully brief. I never wanted to harm or abuse anybody verbally. It was all very low level. A creeping fear and bigotry that I won't let infest me again. And I suspect you could, if you don't catch it quickly and be guided into a much more overt and sinister hatred. Now, yes, I believe that this person, if he had stayed watching these videos and following people on Twitter, probably would have ended up in the extreme end of the alt-right. And maybe he would have been one of those people that actually goes around verbally abusing people and trolling people online and sending hateful messages to people he doesn't like, because he isn't a very questioning person. He isn't the kind of person who questions his own beliefs. He's not a tolerant, open person. So he probably just would have been a mirror image of his former beliefs on the other side. And he probably would have become morally certain in his beliefs as well. So, I don't know, maybe it's a good thing that this happened to him. Because I honestly don't know which is worse, being far left-wing or being far... I don't even know if the alt-right can be described as far... I don't even know how to describe the alt-right, but being a white nationalist, anti-Semite, whatever else the right-wing is today. I'm not sure which is worse, but they're both bad, I think, being extremes. I don't think extreme viewpoints are generally very helpful. And to finish it off, I haven't yet told my wife that this happened, and I honestly don't know how to. I need to apologize for what I said and tell her that I certainly don't believe it. It is going to be a tough conversation, and I'm not looking forward to it. I didn't think this could happen to me, but it did, and it will haunt me for a long time to come. Yep, so he needs to apologize for being critical of Islam. That's something you need to apologize for in his mindset, in his worldview. He had wrong think for a while. He had bad think. He had ideas that were morally wrong. Not incorrect, not factually wrong, morally wrong. And he has to apologize for it. He feels bad about it. It's going to haunt him for a long, long time. And this, guys, is the world that we live in. This is most people. Most people are like this, I think, in either left wing or right wing or whatever viewpoint they have. They're morally certain they're right. They're not willing to consider that the other side is right, and if they do, then they go all in. It's ideologues, zealots. This is most of the population, I think, at this point. It's sad, but examples like this are useful for understanding how these people think, and therefore how to reason with them, how to talk to them, how to convince them of things. Now, a guy like this, I don't think is ever going to be anything more than what we might call a useful idiot. He's obviously not self-aware enough, not self-critical enough to be a really useful person in terms of these kind of discussions. But he's not the only kind of person that shares this kind of viewpoint. So if the goal, which I think one of the goals that I have that people should have, is to pull people away from these extreme viewpoints and pull people more towards rational thinking, openness to new ideas, tolerance of other ideas, being willing to be self-critical and to think that maybe you're wrong about even your most deeply held beliefs. That's what we should be pushing people towards. Not necessarily right or left or up or down or anything like that, but at least people making informed decisions about what they're going to believe and not falling for indoctrination. That's what we should be pushing towards. So, this story, whether it's true or not, it reads as at least somewhat true. Someone's got some understanding of this kind of experience. And I can't say that this is how it happened for me. It was a very gradual process, my change from left-wing thinking, which I once had, to where I am now, which I don't even know how to describe. So far, to be honest, anti-SJW is probably the best description I can think of for where I am now. But anyways, I think this was a useful story to look at. I hope you forgive me for the rambling style of this video. It wasn't scripted at all. I just went through the article and reacted as I saw it. As always, I'm positive improvement, and I wish you all the best.